Merry Christmas.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming out tonight. We're excited to have the Pequannock Historical Society here tonight. And presenting tonight is Jay Wanczyk with Paul. Are you presenting as well? Paul Havman is also presenting. And we're going to be talking tonight about Pequannock's historic homes and sites. Some still standing, some gone but not forgotten. Jay is the chairman of the Historical Commission, and he's the co-founder of the Historical Society. And we're excited to have him here tonight, so please thank them all for coming by. Thank you all.
Thank you, Paul. I'll begin because this is actually a historical society program.
Right, with the help and cooperation of the Historic District Commission. Peas in a pod. So yeah, welcome everybody. We are a relatively new society. We really started in 2015 as Friends of the Martin Berry House. Now, who here has heard of the Martin Berry House in this town? Excellent. Our word is getting out there. Just as a side note, the house is in phase 3 of its rehabilitation and reconstruction phase. Things are proceeding at pace for a change. We got slapped down hard by the pandemic like everybody else. But with any luck at all, we will be open by this spring and certainly no later than the fall. Now I must cross my fingers and hope to die. In the meanwhile, we've been keeping busy researching the history of our fine township. We'll be talking about a lot of that. Jay and I both managed to collect postcards and documents of historic interest about some of the older homes and some of the newer homes that are going to be historic someday. We do meet once a month, January through November, at the, well, for now, at the American Legion Hall, but eventually back at the Martin Berry House. We have membership brochures if you'd like to take one home, and we definitely urge you to join our society. It's just only about $20, $25 a year. Which you can come to our meetings and help and participate with us and help support us. There's also a sign-up sheet if you'd like to get on our mailing list. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be going on with our society in the coming year. Did I miss anything?
No, that's
Okay.
quite comprehensive. With the Martin Berry House under construction during the pandemic, essentially, and a little before that, we haven't obviously had a lot of activities there. We haven't had any activities other than maybe a Pathways tour. And you know, once it opens this coming year, we'll have activities virtually almost every month, and something of interest sometimes to kids, sometimes adults. And the building eventually will also be open to other groups in the town who want to have a meeting there or something too. So everybody can share in it. Right.
We had our plans, which are still under development, foresee the use of the house for exhibits, presentations, and as a community center where people can, even now, people just come and hang out, walk their dogs, hike around, because it's a nice little piece of land. We anticipate going forward, we'll be doing a lot more of that, so you'll be hearing more from us. And with that,
Thank you, Paul.
And I don't want to scare anyone, but I'm going to dim the lights.
Thank you, Brianna.
I could have a seat.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. Tonight, in my presentation, I'm not focusing on a lot of the familiar sites that everybody knows about. You won't see one photograph of the Martin Berry House, for example, because what I wanted to focus on is more or less a drive through the township about 100 years ago to 75 years ago, and seeing what the town looked like. And we're going to start actually in Wayne Township, and we're going to start with the chapel of the Pompton Plains Dutch Reformed Church in Pequannock, New Jersey. Of course, this church is in Wayne, but that area of Wayne was served by the Pequannock Post Office, and the church and the school, which I don't have a photograph of tonight, was called Pequannock School, even though Wayne officially called it the Washington School. When they had the commencement, 8th grade commencement records, it was the Pequannock School. More kids from Pequannock went to that Wayne school because it was a joint school district from the southeast part of Pequannock Township and that eastern section of Wayne, not including Mountain View, down to that area. So
Where was it located?
This church is still there. It's on Newark Pompton Turnpike, just before Black Oak Ridge Road. If you're coming north, it'll be on your right side. And it looks very much the same. Now we're crossing the Newark Pompton Turnpike Bridge, and we're looking north, and we see the Pipeline Bridge. This is from the Newark Water Aqueduct. And today, if you look north, if you're in a bus, you can actually see it quite clearly, or when you're approaching from either way, you look to the north and you see the Pipeline Bridge. It's the same bridge that was there over 100 years ago, but back then they protected the pipe, the actual iron pipe, with a wooden shed on top of it, which was quite unusual. I never knew that until I bought these postcards. This is another view now. This is taken from the Wayne side, and you'll see the Mars Canal feeder. They're not in, this is probably in the World War I era. The canal feeder was abandoned around 1924. So this is in the 19-teens, and you can still see the wooden structure, protecting the pipe. Now we're going across, and we've hit Pequannock Avenue, and we've hit the swimming hole at Camp Madison. And Camp Madison, Paul, where are you?
Here I am.
You want to just say a couple words about Camp Madison?
Yeah, Camp Madison was actually one of several summer camps established along the river all the way up as far as Pompton. This was actually founded by the Boys Club, Madison Boys Club of New York City. Every summer they would bus the kids out. They could swim, they could build stuff. There was woodworking, there was a lot of hiking. Boy, did they hike. This was actually obviously on the river. Now, an interesting footnote is when I contacted them, they're now the Boys and Girls Club of Madison, they just have any knowledge of its existence. They don't remember it.
Thank you. Now, we continued on Pequannock Avenue, and I included the Triangle Grill. The Triangle Grill was first located, we'll see a photograph of the earlier Triangle Grill, but Hans Groff, who was the owner, saw his opportunity when Route 23 was constructed, and so he built a combination house and restaurant on Route 23. It originally was a Triangle Grill. You can see in this section, there was a walk-up window with steps where you could buy your hot dogs or snacks. Two separate entrances, as a lot of restaurants had. You had an entrance to the tap room and an entrance to the restaurant. You know, the house is upstairs, and that wasn't uncommon back then. People had enough money maybe to build a house or to open a business, but they couldn't do both. And so Jones Harbor wasn't the first place where the house was connected to the business. The next photograph is actually a linen postcard, and now it's expanded with a larger dining room. Both entrance doors have been combined into a foyer. You can't walk up to the hot dog window and get a hot dog in a large kitchen, and the living area was expanded. Every organization in town had their meetings there in the 1950s especially, and into the early 60s. Rotary, some of the women's clubs, some of the other organizations in town, they all met there. That was basically the place to meet. Now we're back to the...
Whereabouts, what is that?
That's, well, it's Tips, Rivas today, yes.
That's
Oh.
Thanks for asking.
23 by Madison.
I didn't recognize it though.
Now, we're looking again, we came back out of Pequannock Avenue, and we're looking up the Newark Pompton Turnpike. We haven't crossed the railroad, and this is where ABC Cooling is today. That was originally Hetherington's store, a general store in the Pequannock Post Office. This building was Hetherington's house, and that was torn down, and Old Orchard Village is there today. And so the turnpike, as you can see, was a modern dirt road. Now we're looking at, this is the Hetherington house, probably taken in the 1950s. Yes, this is an assessor's photograph. The assessors photographed every building in town in the early 1950s with a Polaroid camera, and it's quite high quality. The prints are very small. However, which one of the assessors took the photos, I don't know, but when they took it out, they bent it. They bent every photo with their thumb, and they left this little discoloration there. So in order to publish these photos, someone has to blow them up and correct each pixel and get them right. But it's a valuable record that we have, and we're fortunate they were saved. Now we're looking at a little cute building. We're just about ready to cross the railroad. You see the tracks here. And this building was recently torn down and rebuilt as a two-story. It has 3 apartments in it. But the owner continued the little mansard roof. So when you walk by or drive by that today, you see that little building. I don't know what its original purpose was, other than maybe a store. Grace Church, which was located in Pequannock in the 1950s, actually had their services there. And then in the 50s and 60s, it was a union hall, and I think it was the union of people that were employed with DuPont or Mac Molding in Wayne, I'm not sure. It's just one of those little buildings that you never notice, and its successor is still there today, but 2 stories high. Now we're looking at what occasionally was an A&P in the 1930s. It appears in some published photographs, I think in Emil Savini's history book of the town. You see it from a different angle with a train going by. And this is just one of those, it's still there today. The next building, that was Cosmo Bella Pizza, before Cosmo's bought it and built the pizza parlor there. And it just shows the type of construction that were in storefronts that were in that area. We're moving down the street now, and we're looking at, this is the Triangle Grill, which became later Rum Cellars, or Jersey's. And this is where King's Kid Deli is.
That's the Chinese restaurant,
Or the Chinese restaurant, right. And
next to King's Kid.
yeah, and this is the point where the cannon is today. So this is the bend, and as you can see, the point took its name from the point, and it was you know, it's a regular small gin mill, as they say. Going up just behind the point and the building is Pequannock Engine Company No. 2. This happens to be the Pequannock Band, which was a private band that was sponsored by a husband and wife who just thought music was great for kids growing up. There was no high school in town with a band. There was just 2 schools, elementary, kindergarten through 8th grade. They didn't really have a band. They didn't have a junior high. So they formed this private band in the 1930s, and it went all the way up until the 50s, till the high school basically came to town. But that's in front of the firehouse, and that's the side that's on Lincoln Park Road. Notice the Engine Company No. 2, Pequannock Township sign, black with gold leaf lettering. I'll point out its twin later. Now, a little more side trip in Pequannock. This was the branch library. It was a house that the town foreclosed upon in the 1930s or 40s, and it was available. And just like in Pequannock, in the northern part of Pequannock Township in Pompton Plains, a group of interested individuals got together from a women's club, got together and formed the first library in Pequannock. And that branch library was in operation until sometime in the late 1970s, when the township sold the property and consolidated the library in the town hall library section, and that was sold. There are 2 houses there today. A little out of sequence there. Now we're going on Jacksonville Road, on the corner of Mandeville and the Boulevard. This home is still today. Mal Rapelier was one of the founders of Pequannock Library. This was the family farm where she grew up. This home is still there today. It looks a little different, but it's a corner of Mandeville and the Turnpike. You can notice they're selling honey. You notice the little sign, like a Burma shave sign, separate signs, Honey. This is looking north. Same house on where Mandeville is, but all the way in the distance, you see the Slingerland House at Jacksonville Road. See, the boulevard is just a dirt path. It's not as straight line as it is today. And when they formally established the boulevard, there was a little controversy because they took some land from more on one side than the other, and farmers complained and whatever. But that was the condition of the boulevard back in the teens. Now we're back on the Turnpike, and this scenic gas station and repair shop is near Alexander Avenue, and quite frankly, it's still there today. That's where all you see the dump trucks parked and everything, where contractor's yard is. This house next door is still existent there. They have a little library, free book exchange on the lawn. But this is what it looked like in probably the 1930s, and it wasn't the most scenic place then. And it hasn't changed. I mean, it's changed a little, but it hasn't changed much. We're going to jump forward. We've passed the Mandeville Inn. We've passed that historic site, and this house is still there today. It's been modified a little. One of the neat features is still visible. So you notice how the siding curves in towards the attic window, and you have this this oval attic window. You have the special wood shingles all over, and this beautiful wraparound porch. This home is the home that Dr. Brown was located in, and Dr. Rombaugh after him. The area of the porch was enclosed for offices and extended, but it's right next to PV School, and it's there today. And there was nothing around it. You can see in the background the mountains, because the rest of the town was just fields. There were not as many trees in the valley back then. We're going to take a ride, since we're near Sunset Road. We're going all the way up Sunset Road, and this is the Hunt Farm. The Hunt Farm, this is 1920s, was eventually purchased by the county for the Morris County Golf Course. And it was off of West Sunset Road, and you went down into a little beautiful valley, and it was the Hunt Farm for many, many years. And the house was modernized a bit in the 40s and 50s, and the Hunt family lived there until the golf course came through.
Standing at the door, I wonder why they were standing, having their picture taken. Whole family.
This home is Calvin Lodge, the Presbyterian church that's on Sunset Road, and that whole tract has been just purchased. Calvin Lodge was basically a Dutch colonial home that was extensively modernized around the turn of the 20th century by a doctor who had a clinic on the second floor. Although the main walls on the bottom floor are typical 18-inch stone wall thickness, most of the home is, it's been modified, but that's an endangered building now. And the church or school organization that bought the entire lot is rumored to going to be demolishing that and the church and the little school building there. So that's what it looked like in the 1950s. You can see again, our assessor is bending them the wrong way there. Now we're going further up Sunset Road, and you might recognize this house. It was called the Florida House Farm at the turn of the 20th century. And it's right on after the first turn in Sunset Road, and it's about halfway up between that and the next turn. And that later was owned by the Beams family, and they operated the dairy there. We have quite a number of archival photographs from that family, donated by Mrs. Schober, who was the granddaughter of the Beams. Technical difficulty. There's a little business card we have, Florida House, Mrs. E.L. Drew, proprietors. I don't know who Mrs. Drew was, and I'll have to ask Mrs. Schober. Boarding $7 to $9 a week. The post office and the railroad station, Pompton Plains, Greenwood Lake Branch, Erie Railroad, 27 miles from New York. Trains met, which means if you said you were coming on the 4:30 in the afternoon train, they would send a wagon to get you. It can't be underestimated how important the railroad was to the life of the community. It was the connection to New York, to Montclair, and businesses like Florida House, like the Mandeville Inn, depended upon a lot of visitors coming out for the weekend. They were going out to the country or even spending a week in the summer. There is a beautiful hand-colored photograph that we have. Again, you can see the era is not the motor vehicle era, it's the horse and buggy era. It's probably one of the buggies they met the trains with. And it was done by a company in Patterson. And it's a beautiful hand-colored rendering. That's what it looks like today. So it's essentially unchanged.
Oh, wow.
The view is spectacular in this. You can look right there. This is Sunset Road now. You're looking down into the valley. There's the First Reformed Church. And obviously there's no homes along Sunset Road, and you see some of the cows. And you can just imagine what life is like then. This is a view from the northern part of the farm, and you can see what we call Turkey Mountain there, Mountainside Park, and the ravine where the pipeline goes up. Mountainside Park would be in this area. And again, you see some cows and whatever. Just beautiful pastoral scenery that doesn't exist today. This is another view of Pompton Plains. This was taken more or less from the northern end of town, maybe in the vicinity of where Scanlon's funeral home is. Trying to figure, this appears to be the pipeline going north. This is the what Marlou Bellier called the DeBow plantation, where Marlou Bellier lived on the end of DeBow Lane. The home is still there, some of the barns are there, and this is the bend in the road. And you can also see the edge of the valley, how this was the prehistoric Lake Passaic at one time, because you can actually see how the shoreline was when it was a prehistoric lake over 10,000 years ago. And that's why our plain is essentially so level, and then why it's a good drainage in the northern section. We're back to the beam farm, and parts of the barn are still there, the foundation, and more cows. There's a better view of, I think, the same barn, but now it's pointed red. You can see down here the Jesse Vaness home. You're going down Sunset Road, making the bend, and that's the Gray House, the Gray Historic House, right there. And that photograph is probably from the late 40s, early 50s. This, I have to find out the name of the two people if Margaret knows, but this is a locomotive wheel, the rim of the locomotive wheel, steam locomotive. And what they would do is they would cut it and hang it on a pole, and there would be an iron mallet hanging from the bottom. And you'd pound on that for your fire alarm. And neighbors would hear that, and it would alert the fire company. We also have a photograph of one down near Pequannock Avenue and Acme Fabric. I don't know how many were located in town, but that was a signal for the firemen. If you heard that ringing, you would race to a fire. And obviously it was a local landmark, and these two boyfriend and girlfriend, I guess, had their photograph taken in front of them. Now we're back on the Newark-Pompton Turnpike at Sunset Road, and this is the parsonage of the Dutch Reformed Church, and that building is still there today. And it has been modified with additional offices, law offices and whatever. This is just south of Chilton Hospital on the same side. This is what the original Chilton Hospital was to look like. When they did prospectus in the late 1940s, about 1948-49, proposing a hospital, this was the first design. And it looks a bit more like a country club than a hospital. It's pretty impressive, and obviously they didn't build it that way. The hospital wasn't built until about 3 or 4 years later, and more or less into that formal structure and a bit larger. That picture is from the late 50s, judging the year of the Corvette there. This is the current parsonage of the First Reformed Church, the Mandeville House. Back then it was the Phillips Summer Cottage. You'll notice you did have wealthy people from New York City that came out here for the summer. They liked it. They built a summer cottage. And some of the cottages were quite large. First Reformed Church, we've seen a number of photographs of it. The reason I put this photograph in today is because of the flagpole, the Liberty Pole. This Liberty Pole, or its predecessor, was erected at the time of the American Revolution, and it was replaced 3 times. The last time in the early 20th century, they did not replace it when the township was paving or widening the turnpike and creating the sidewalks in the area. Town Clerk Carl Edwards noted that he found the foundations of 3 separate Liberty poles there. And it would have been nice to see that, that recreated. There's another photograph, and again, the Liberty pole is there. This would have been right in front of, this would be just about where the gazebo is today. In this photograph, you can see Grace Chapel, as well as the First Reformed Church. Both of them aren't painted. They're just a natural brick. The turnpike there is quite narrow, but there is a dirt walk path along that side, and it appears one on this side as well. Much later date, there's no Liberty pole. We have the electric lines, and you notice how all of the electric poles and tree trunks are whitewashed, so drivers don't crash into them. You see the side of Pompton Plains School. This is before the 1924 and 1928 editions of the side rooms. This is before the fire, but the church house was built, so you could date this about 1935 or 1936. This is from Mrs. Schober's personal collection, and this shows the extent of the fire damage. It actually did ruin some of the walls in this area, and it's a testament that they rebuilt it. Because so many churches that are lost are never rebuilt the same way, and they virtually built everything except they didn't recreate the second-story windows there in the choir loft, but everything else was faithfully rebuilt. And just bear with me for a second. I don't know my jams, but
As I recall, they commissioned an architect who studied under Christopher Wren.
yeah. And here it is under construction. You can see the steeple is only, the scaffolding is only that high, and now it's completed up to the belfry, and they're going higher with the actual steeple. You can still see the charred stains on the brickwork, and obviously the roof isn't done here, and here it's completed. It's nice to see those progressions. This is probably after World War II. You notice the turnpike is concrete, paved concrete here, and in very poor condition. Notice all the cracking. This is a Memorial Day parade, but you notice they're walking from the north-south, which they did. I don't know how far down they walked, possibly to where the cannon is today, but they're walking past the First Reformed Church. This is Chief Walter Sweetman. This is this looks like one of the DeBows. I'm going to say Al Barry or Roy DeBow, maybe Al Barry. And this is Jane Costello's father, Grant Van Soen. He was mayor at the time. Since I'm nearby the cemetery, I just walked by this yesterday, and this is the mausoleum there, and it's quite a remarkable structure. The company had a website that actually built or quarried the granite and finished it up in New Hampshire. The website is gone, but this was, at the time it was constructed in the 1920s, this is only made out of 5 pieces of stone. And unlike most mausoleums, this entire top is one solid piece. And churches and cemeteries don't allow mausoleums much anymore because of the leaking and the maintenance. But this, as long as the granite lasts and each of the seams on the corner last, that'll be there. It's remarkable if you look through the back or look through the window. Here you see Grace Chapel, and this is a little nondescript house that is today's where the assistant pastor's house is, right across from the post office. Here's Grace Chapel, and this tiny little house was there. I don't know who lived there. I think it was a widowed woman or a woman with a child, and that was there, and it was torn down a number of years ago. But it's just one of the parts of town that just disappeared, and nobody remembers it quite. In Carl Edwards' book, and I have to say, most everything that I checked in his book is very accurate. But this was said to be the house on the corner of Franklin Avenue and the Turnpike where Columbia Bank is today. It's called the Van Houten House. And, you know, it looks quite stately and things. But this is the house that was there when I was a kid. It doesn't look like the same house. Could it have been modernized that much? I don't know. But this is the house that was torn down when they built Columbia Bank. And Well, this is the assessor's photo from the early 50s. So you can see it's kind of in ill repair. Probably, I never knew. I mean, we kind of went by it quickly when we were walking to second grade to school because we didn't know anybody in the house. There's just the Pompey Plain School with the two-room 1924 addition on the front. You can see the side there with the ornamental brickwork is still there. When they built the classrooms on either side, 2 more classrooms on either side, they still left this ornamental brickwork and woodwork until the end of the school when it was torn down. There's a postcard of it from the 1920s, 30s. There was actually a circular driveway, not a walkway in the front. Jane Costello's got a hilarious story because Miss Fenner, the teacher, supervising teacher or principal there, had her car parked and she was adamant nobody was going to interrupt the test in the classroom. The classroom was here. And finally one of the kids noticed smoke coming from her car and said, "Miss Fenner, your car is on fire." And Jane tells the story a lot better than I do. But there it is with all the additions. Now this photograph was taken when the turnpike, the broken concrete was paved for macadam, but there were still no sidewalks. So this probably is around 1954, 53, that's a guess. But, and the bushes were very small around the front. The cornerstone that actually was in this section had been moved around from the front of the original school. That's the original two-room classroom. That's been moved, and that's in front of the post office today. Back of the Pompey Plain School were 2 homes. This eventually became the Pequannock Township Library. The Pequannock Township Library in the 1950s was in Grace Chapel, and at that time the church rented it out to the town library, and it was called Grace Hall. But the separation of church and state, they couldn't have it in a chapel, they called it a hall. Then they moved to this building on the side street, which is part of the municipal parking lot. And the library stayed here until 1962 when the wing on the municipal building was built. That wasn't the only house along Browns Lane. This was a smaller house back there. And this is basically where the police have a shed to store some of their traffic control materials and whatever. And I actually don't remember that, so that was gone at the time I went to Pompey Plain School in late 50s. This house is interesting. This is where Pompton Pharmacy is today. And obviously this is just before the house was torn down. This had to be the late 50s. You can see Atlas 5 and 10, part of the 4 stores that were adjacent but not connected to Marco's at the time. Mrs. Clapp, the librarian, lived there, and she scared all of us. We didn't say a word. And this is just a house on Poplar Avenue, and some of you may have seen my historical program on Frank Lewis, and this is on Poplar Avenue, brick house. I put it here because Doug and Barbara Museo have been so active at the front library friends. That's their home today. And they have no idea still that this took place there. I really have to, and unfortunately the photograph is very, in very poor condition, but I'll have to get a better print of that somehow. Now we're going back on Turnpike, and this is Dawn's Rest. Dawn's Rest was basically a working man's boarding house. It wasn't as high class a place as the Mandeville Inn or Florida House, and people would board there. This is essentially where the Little Food Cafe was, that row of stores, the music store, Shamrock, who just moved out. That house was there. I don't know when it was torn down. Obviously, the stores there were built in the very early 50s, so whether it was torn down in the 40s or during World War II or slightly before, I don't know. This is another view looking south on the Turnpike, Dawn's Rest. The house, Lanthier's, which is where Friendly's or the Little Food Inn is today. And this is the house where Frank Scanrello's office is and today. Poplar Avenue would be right there. PNC Bank would be right across the street. And of course Jones Hardware, but here's a view no one has seen before. This is another assessor's photograph. You can see he messed that one up too. But, everybody was used to Robbie's father putting Santa on that portion of the roof by the chimney. Well, it seems like the first year Santa only made it there, and that was news to Robbie when I showed him the photograph. You notice the bench, the twin of that bench is, one of them was in front of the railroad station, one of them is still in front of the doctor's office in the Thomas Mandeville House up the Turnpike. Those were reportedly the benches from the First Reformed Church, and at some time the church replaced them and sold off their benches, and different people in the town purchased them. This is where Robbie's mother and sister had the antique shop, and there's an old rambler. There's an old-time postcard view, and before, Robbie's father built the store addition on in 1954. Before that, there was an enclosed stairway up to, basically, it wasn't an apartment, it was just a room, but it was separate from the rest of the house. This was the windmill tower, an enclosed tower for the windmill. Again, this is the corner where the enclosed stairway was. And that was torn down in the late 40s or early 50s to permit room for the store. And that's where the little well was, if you remember the well, next to the antique shop and the barn. Going down Jackson Avenue a little further, basically the field where Quick Check and the gas station is was called Station Field. And that was, it was privately owned, but people played ball games there. And from World War II on until the mid-1950s, the American Legion sponsored the 4th of July field days. And there were fun and games for the kids, free ice cream, Cracker Jacks, and the like. Remember I pointed out that sign on the Pequannock firehouse? This is the wooden engine company #1 firehouse, and you can see they have a matching sign. Since the town combined both of the volunteer fire companies into a volunteer fire department, I guess that was a big thing in the town. They had matching signs. But this is Jackson Avenue, and I can just barely remember that. I got in on the last field days, which I think I was 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old. Many of you know Edie Thompson, who used to be in town. That's Edie Thompson. She's in Florida. This postcard has been seen before, but with my connection with the Historical Society, this is about 1910, 1915, probably the World War I period. You can see all the advertising posters around, and also the freight shed that doesn't exist anymore.
But no telephone pole.
Let me brush it out. Here's the pole, though. This is taken 1914. This is Jim Staples, who was the agent at the time. He used to have the girlfriend, and they got married and rented the house next door. He took all of the posters off and put them on the freight shed. There's the baggage wagon, very similar to the one we have today, the little garden. And the railroad actually had a beautification prize, where the station agent maintained the station in the best condition. He would get some kind of a small prize. But so they took pride in that. You can see that there was no semaphore here to signal the trains. Their semaphore was located there on the opposite side and governed a passing siding where trains would wait, because one would be going northbound and the other would be going southbound. You notice there's a brick chimney there, which we hope to recreate. That fell into disrepair in the 1950s, and the mayor put a tin smoke jack. The town will be applying for a restoration grant, not only remove the lead-based paint, some of the same paint that's there, but also to replace the slate roof, which is in disrepair, and we will recreate the chimney. There's another photograph, just probably late 40s, early 50s from the car, and you can see the freight shed quite clearly there, which was torn down. You can see a elevator for coal. What was Jeffrey's and Lupton Cabinet Shop was Berry's lumber and coal yard area. This is from the 1950s, and there were a lot of commuters waiting. This happens to be Grant Van Saun, who was the mayor at the time, and Jane did a photo essay, following her father commuting to work by rail. And this is the crossing that leads to Cedar Road, which now with the bike path, you'll be able to, well, you can use it already. It's paved. One of the interesting things was American Railway Express was one of the express companies that served the railroad station. So if you wanted something shipped in the early 1900s. You dealt with Wells Fargo, and Wells Fargo shipped it all over the country. They were the UPS or the FedEx. But you had to go to the railroad station. And whoever you shipped it to in California or Ohio would have to pick it up at the railroad station. That was, Wells Fargo got out of that business at the end of World War I, and a private company, American Railway Express, owned by all the railroads collectively, was formed. We found the original sign, or actually the neighbors in the house across the way found the original sign that was used as lumber on a partition wall. And when they removed that partition, they gave the sign to us at the museum. There's a picture of the freight shed, which lasted until the mid-70s. Kids set fire to a part of it, and it was torn down at that time. Going further down Jackson Avenue, this is a photograph that many of you are familiar with. This is the lock, right by the beginning of the Morris Canal's feeder canal, called the Pompton Feeder. The lock house is here, and the dam would be across in this area. This lock is still in existence. When they decommissioned the canal in the 1924 period, 25 period, they filled it in. And during Hurricane Irene, the flooding actually scoured out the dirt, and you can see that lock there today. This is, technically, it's not a public area. It's on the Wayne side, behind the large dirt operation. There's a little trail behind the post office there, and you can see that today. The reason I put that there is, this is the feeder dam. This is an older version of the feeder dam. This side is the Pompton Plains side. They call it Finch Island. It's separated by water. There's a channel here that comes from the north from the Pequannock River. The Pequannock River also merges around this way. And this was the area that created the water, the pond of water that fed the canal feeder. This is the dam just south of that. This building is curious as to what it was. It looks more like a cabin. Somebody suggested it could have been a scout cabin or something like that. And there seems to be a flagpole with a flag, United States flag there, or is that just a shadow? We don't know. So if anybody has an idea or any information on that building, we'd like to find out. This is just the Jackson Avenue Bridge going across. This is the Pompton Feeder Bridge. So this is the Wayne side. This is going into Pompton Plains. So that's the bridge that existed at the time. We don't know. If anybody knows where F.M. Taylor's summer residence, Pompton Plains, was, please let us know. As I said, there were wealthy individuals, and no one can place that building. So F.M. Taylor's summer residence. The first hot dog stand in town. James Staples, the railroad agent, was an entrepreneur, and so he erected this hot dog stand basically where Carnival Spot later stood, where the three storefronts are today. And there's his son James, and little James is sitting there. I couldn't figure out where it was, and then this is the first town hall. It was rented out as a town hall. This was the home where the postmaster, Mrs. Knock, and her husband lived later on. And there's the first offices that were the Bow store that was rented by the town as the town hall. There's another view of it, a little older. This is where Bob Minogue's office is. I understand the Pequannock Valley Mental Health has just purchased that property. And this is where the other offices are, and this is where the town offices are. So you can tell it was quite scenic, even though it was a dirt road at the time. There were good walking paths on either side. Walking was popular then, as it is now. There's little James Staples again at the hot dog stand. That's a cute photo. And there's the township offices, how they looked in the 1950s. Today, the front entrance is bricked over and there's brick in front, but the building still has this unique catbird seat where whoever was the owner or the proprietor could gaze out and see what was going on along the turnpike. There's the storefront. Evans Place has a tree in the middle of it. I guess you drove around either side, and that's a very early photograph. This is in the late 1940s. This is where the optician shop was, part of the Jones Hardware property. This was a two-family house. The Vaccines lived there. That was torn down for the bookshop and the two brick buildings. One of my favorite postcards, candy store, ice cream, right? And Stop and Shop supermarket. There's 6 children there. And they're all looking at something. Maybe a girl's got, has a baby carriage there. Maybe they got kittens in it or something like that. It's just one of those great summer photographs. This is Sherman Avenue in town, and it's rare that you find a postcard of a side street in town. This is the Sherman Avenue from the Turnpike looking towards the boulevard. This would be Union Avenue. All of these houses are here today. This little house looks about the same. They've been modernized, but that's basically the condition of the town in the early 20s. This is the Peter Hopper House on Post Road. It originally fronted on the boulevard. The property was subdivided off, and now that beautiful house is on Post Road. This is the original artist's ink and pencil rendering that was used as a basis for the lithograph in the Munzel's Morris County history. And we're fortunate enough to have that in our collection. That's what the house looked like in an older postcard many years ago. It looks much better today. Getting back to the Turnpike, this is where the Lutheran Church is today. This house actually was used by the pastor of the Lutheran Church when they first built it. But this is a significant building. Most of you know B-Card Kettlewood. This was her grandfather's blacksmith shop. And there are some photographs of that in Salvini's book. But this gives the relation to the Turnpike. Here it's an older photograph, again, concrete. Train wreck. We had a lot of train wrecks, and this was reportedly in Compton Plains. I could never figure out where it was. See a barn, see an ornate water tower, almost looks like a church, but it's a water tower, and I see a house with a peak roof. I found a late 1930s aerial photograph of the new Route 23, and I see a water tower there, and I see the buildings, and then I compared the buildings, and this is just about where Woodland Place is today, just north of Woodland Place. And people are inspecting it and whatever. And I don't have the accident report. Usually there's a federal accident report done even way back then. That appears to be in the 20s. Peck's Summer Cottage. You know, summer cottages are big. The Pecks, this is Scanlon's funeral home today. The Pecks loved this town. They paid off the mortgage for the First Reformed Church house. And then when the First Reformed Church burned, it cost $100,000 to rebuild, and the church only had $50,000 worth of insurance. The church raised a few $1,000s, maybe $10,000, and just before the church was rededicated, they came in and paid the rest. He had a seat on the New York Stock Exchange, and she bought a fancy fire engine for the fire company in his memory. Wonderful people that really, she led the parade for raising money for World War I soldiers for the Red Cross. Wonderful people in town. There again is another view of the town. I had that one before. This house is on the boulevard today. This is Mountain Avenue. This house is on the boulevard. I don't know what that house is. And other views. This is taken looking down from the mountain. I don't have any landmarks other than the mountains there. This house was at the first bend of Mountain Avenue. And this is the assessor's photo. It's not too clear. And you can see the nice hill behind there. We found an article. Dave Wisniewski was going through all of the old 1880s Booten papers and Morristown papers and found an article that said a relatively famous American purchased it as her farm. She wanted to do shooting. That was Annie Oakley. Annie Oakley lived for about a dozen or 15 years in Nutley. And obviously she couldn't practice shooting there, or she tried. So she bought the farm here, and that home existed up until not long ago. The property was sold and it was torn down just before the pandemic. And none of us on the Historical Society ever knew that as Annie Oakley's house. The old historians in town kept referring to it as one of the DeBow houses, and I forget which DeBow. And, you know, modern history didn't interest people back then. They were always interested in colonial history or antebellum, pre-Civil War history. And some of that later history was lost. One day, a woman about my age came in town and she says, boy, it's changed a lot. I moved out when I was in high school. And she says, you know, a lot of buildings are missing. She says, they didn't tear down the Annie Oakley house, did they? And I said, you know where it is? And she described it. I said, yes, you know, a year ago. But, you know, the house had been modernized considerably inside. The interior was all renovated. And unfortunately, it just wasn't the type of house that interested people, and it had like 2 acres behind it, so people wanted to build what's there now. That's the Van Gelder Van Sollen house with part of Jane's ancestors. Reaction Motors factory at the north end of town. That factory was built, the only factory in town, and it was a man who produced silver plate and silver utensils and whatever for Tiffany for a number of years. It was baking. Then it became a speakeasy owned by the town recorder, which was like the magistrate, and it was called the Silver Circle. And then Reaction Motors bought or rented that in the 1940s to build their rocket engines, which were used in Chuck Yeager's aircraft. That's another photograph of the home. This home was on Route 23 by where the Carney Bank is now. The dentist, Jane Colfax Young, had her offices there for quite a while. And that's it. I have a lot more photographs, and I could do another separate tour of the town, hitting another number of sites. But it gives you an idea of the humble roots that our town had. When you look at Butler on eBay, and you look at all the postcards they have, or even Lincoln Park, they have far more postcards from Lincoln Park because they had a pharmacist in town, and Fred Wetstein, and he took photographs of everything and made postcards. There just aren't that many for Pequannock Township. And it's actually a little more economical to collect them now, as opposed to 20 years ago when they would get astronomical prices for them. There's not that many people interested in the history anymore. Any questions? Yes?
This came up just today on Facebook. Someone found an old thing about a lake. It was described as being west of the Route 23 circle. This person thought that where Foothills Park today was where this recreational lake was, which showed a picture of swimming. Now, I was here in the 60s. I recall that area was like a sand pit.
It was a sand pit. They had a dredge in that. They dredged it out. No, that was really a mountain until they really began a lot of soil mining there. I think they used some of it for Route 23, and then later on they actually had a dredge, and they created that pond in that area.
Right. So I think when
recreational lakes, there were several. There were
Suntan Lake, I think
area.
it was. If
Pardon?
it was described as being west of the circle,
Yeah.
I think it must have been Suntan Lake where the
Yeah,
target
well,
is
they
now.
had Valley Spring Lake, you had Suntan Lake.
That was it. It was called Valley Spring.
Valley Spring.
Which one is that?
That was basically,
Where the condos are up there.
yeah, the condos. There's a valley in there. There's literally a valley, and you would drive down in there.
Oh,
And in fact,
okay.
our Pequannock First Aid and Rescue Squad used to give, the Red Cross used to give swimming lessons to the kids there.
When did that go defunct?
Sometime in the late 60s, I would think, or early
Okay, so
70s.
that's it right there.
Yeah, because in town you had McDonald's Beach on this side, you had Crestmere on the other side, and then you had Valley Spring and Suntan Lake, and you had Lake Rovere down in Mountain View, which was a brickyard, a car, they.
Where the defunct car dealership is, just before
Yeah,
the open.
and that,
Yeah, I remember when they filled that in with
Laguna
garbage.
Beach, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So those recreational lakes were a big thing, because people
Yes,
lived
they
in the
were.
city, and they drove, Route 23 was bumper to bumper, and they drove out for, their Sunday outing or their Saturday outing.
My mother told me, they lived in Jersey City, that in the late 40s, they swam in the river about where the Jackson Avenue Bridge goes
Yeah.
over.
Even in the 50s, there was a big rope swing, and there was a little sandbar and a beach, and you'd find cars all parked there. People swimming for free. Also down in Pequannock a bit, and much more in Two Bridges and Mountain View. I mean, it was just a free place to swim.
Did someone put a stop to it because it was polluted or something, or
No.
it just fell out of vogue?
Obviously there was some industrial pollution, with DuPont and whatever upstream, and some of the, I have we bought out the homes along the river, and especially down on Riverside Drive in Pequannock, they were rentals on a large tract. And when some of them were torn down and some of them the buyout torn down, we have to, get rid of the septic system. And it's like, what septic system?
No.
Yeah, and it was just a pipe out to the river,
Oh.
And they swam in it, I guess things got diluted, But, it was a different time then. And, on the other hand, people did get diseases and stuff like that, but they didn't think anything it was unusual, I guess, you know. But no, my mom grew up in Fairfield and they swam down at Two Bridges. That's where she taught herself to swim and dive, you know, so, and that was the 1930s, so. And, you know, all the farm kids and everybody went down there, so it was just part of life. And, you know, people have a different impression of what this town was, but it was pretty basic back then. You had the farms, and as you can see in some of those aerial photographs, everything west was farms. And kids could always earn a few nickels, you know, they were always looking for people to pick things, and then poultry became a big industry too. Paul, did you want to get anything?
Yeah, Mountain View was also very big on the old swimming hole, all along the river down there. You could rent canoes, you could swim, you could jump in the river anywhere you wanted to. There were actually, your analog to the Pompton Plains Beach, there's one in Pequannock, down along the river on Pequannock Ave there. It was quite the thing, but for some reason it didn't last all that long. I'm not sure why, I haven't found a whole lot about it. One of the things that we did not touch on, I could devote an hour to that, was the Mandeville Inn. Was right over there where PV School is now. It started out life in the 1700s as a Mandeville home, one of the founding families in this valley. George Washington actually is known to have stayed there at least one time. Our member Bob Friedman actually was able to dig out the record from the colonial period, paying them for their time and trouble. The Mandeville home became a state of farm until about 1899, 1900, when it was turned into an inn because the turnpike was the main way through town. It was very popular. An inn was definitely needed, something higher class than the Dawn's Rest and some of the other places around here. It went through a couple of different owners. It survived Prohibition, becoming a speakeasy, of course. There was a little knock that you would have to execute properly if you wanted to get inside. I also belong to a club, the East Coast Research and Discovery Association, which also meets here in town. We dug up part of the garbage dump that we found there. We've known for years that they had buried their trash on the property. About where the ball field is over there, right at about Pitcher's Mound. So last year, the club spent several weekends digging out all sorts of goodies, intact bottles, a glass sign or two from the bar, any number of interesting artifacts. There's a book here if you would like to take a look at that. So the Mandeville Inn survived Prohibition, but it didn't survive the Depression. It was closed down in the 40s and until the Board of Ed purchased it. And then the rest of you know, they knocked it down and put up PV School, which opened in the 49, 50, somewhere in there. That's my own personal bugaboo. I'm researching as much of that as I can. Anything else that you'd like to know? Another question back there.
You mentioned that there was a dam on Jackson Avenue for the Morris Canal. Is the dam still there?
Yes, there's two dams. The main dam is called Feeder Dam, and that was rebuilt when the Morris Canal was decommissioned in the 1920s, early 20s to mid-20s. They determined that there were several parts of the infrastructure that were worth saving or rebuilding. And so they rebuilt that into a modern, early 20th century concrete dam. And as I said, if you go back to look at the lock, you can see the dam, just follow the trails.
So
But,
if you go behind the post office, there's a...
yeah, between the post office and the soil operation,
Right.
It's no trespassing, so you're on your own, but you can see it, yes. And the dam is quite impressive. There's also a smaller dam adjacent to the town's aquatic park. You can't get back there at all unless you go across private property, and that's Carl Bauer's property, and I would advise, if you'd like to go there, stop in the office or make an appointment with him. Don't walk there. He's got millions of dollars worth of horses and doesn't want people walking across there. And even though the town has a right-of-way there, there's a section where the town doesn't own, so you have to get permission from Carl. That's a smaller dam. It's probably about 400 or 500 feet long, but it's not as high as the feeder dam. And both of those actually slow the river down a bit. They impound the water behind, which used to be used for the canal. And there's a guard bank about 15 feet high that connects both of them. That's an earthen dam. And the advantage, and the state looked at possibly ripping them out about 10, 12 years ago. And we raised a little alarm about that because it was basically like a swamp, a mud-filled swamp before that, but the velocity of the floodwater would more or less go straight towards Route 23 in the village. And it's actually slowed down by curving around. And the state saw the advantage of that and said, no, we're going to leave it as is. So, you know, it does serve a purpose, and it's quite an impressive dam. And if I can find it quickly, I do have a photograph here, but I can't find it among 30,000 photographs.
I was just curious, when you talk about the Mandeville House, here it says that black slaves and servants were born there. So there was slavery here?
Slavery was all over in I think, almost every colony except maybe Vermont or something. But slavery was basically the abolitionists.
The rest of the North. So
no, the abolitionists were very active, so slavery became a thing of the past in New Jersey. In 1804 was the law that was passed, but it was a gradual manumission. A young child a baby born into slavery was still an indentured servant until girls were 22 and boys were 24, because they had to worry about property rights, because slaves were considered in the law's property. New Jersey at the time of the Civil War only had maybe 24 slaves left. I've seen figures of 16. But the Mandeville House,
yeah, I mean, what was the
in the 1700s and up through the early 1800s, when they still had slaves.
Did they farm? I mean, it doesn't look like a farm.
No, and slavery in New Jersey, especially in the northern part of New Jersey, New York State and whatever, they were on small farms, so they were farm hands. The women were governesses, taking care of the children, doing the household chores. The Dutch in particular took them to church on Sundays. They had there was a balcony in the First Reformed Church the slaves attended. Slavery, people, starting in the American Revolution, and it's not what the 1619 Project says, but if you read the local literature, people became very uncomfortable with slavery, because here they're talking about freedom and not being bound. In fact, the Pequannock's own declaration of not quite independence, but declaration of wanting to follow the colonial Congress and not the king, even says, with hearts abhorring slavery, that they were referring to themselves as slaves of the crown. But in all the literature that I've been reading literature, that made especially the Dutch very uneasy about it. The Quakers in South Jersey, where they actually had more slaves than North Jersey for a while, they basically abandoned slavery first. And then they, so, you know, New Jersey, yes, had slaves. And we have an advertisement, copy of an advertisement of 2 runaway slaves in the early, I think, 1809, that the Berry, one of the Berries,
That's right.
was looking for, yeah. So.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, but it wasn't the big plantation.
You wouldn't think that there would be slaves associated.
It wasn't the big plantation slavery, but it still was slavery, and people,
slavery.
on occasion, were mistreated very badly. The same thing. If somebody deprives you of your freedom for your life, what are you going to do?
Right.
Slavery is slavery, but it wasn't the large scale. But yes, that was not uncommon.
Interesting. Also, the Osborne House, you didn't cover that, and that's in here.
No.
That is very interesting.
My friend Timmy Solik, my classmate Timmy Solik, lived there.
And company?
And in fact, he even, when I was talking to him about a year and a half ago, he said, you know, it was up for sale. He lives out, I don't know, Texas somewhere. I was thinking of buying it back, he said, but he didn't. But, yeah.
That's interesting, though. Mail order, I mean, really, mail order house.
And it wasn't just Sears Roebuck. A number of companies had plans, and they would sell pre-cut, you know, just like today. Miles Homes was doing it.
So,
Yeah.
and that still exists.
Yes,
I have to go past that. That's very, very interesting to me.
it is. Are we okay on time, or? Okay.
Yeah, if there's more questions.
Yeah, any more questions? The town museum is open second and fourth Sundays of the month, but if it's close to a holiday, probably not. So you can kind of check. I'll put a little sign up.
Is that at the railroad station?
Yes. We're packed with things that came in during the pandemic. We're still sorting through it. And it's never ending. And we don't say no to things. Martin Berry House has, and the Historical Society has a more circumspect process of accepting donations. They have to evaluate it. We've been a little more accepting of things, because even if someone brings in something that isn't so special, you know, maybe we can use it. Yeah, it's World War II related or something like that, but we appreciate it. And we, you know, and they see it the next time, oh, I've got this, and then they bring in a prize, an original painting. And we have an original painting that was done of the dam at Brzezinski's Pond, which was Reynolds Pond or Bush's Pond. No longer exists. That was the ice skating pond for the town on Sunset Road. After you go around the shop bend, you go right down, and there's a beautiful stone house there. And
When did that dam break? I remember skating
Doria,
there.
I think it was around early 70s. I think it was Hurricane Doria.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember skating there on the Christmas Eve, 1968, on the last Apollo mission that they sent up, you know, where they just circled the moon. And I remember actually asking a policeman, did they paint it? I was 8 years old, but Brzezinski didn't last much longer than that, I guess.
I don't think so, yeah. But, yeah, there's a lot of history. And I never got to ice skate up there, even though
You know, they say that people, I have an old book, you might have read it, where that people used to skate all the way on that east ditch that ran all the way from Lincoln Park all the way up through wherever it goes now. It would freeze over. That's what they call it. I guess that's the Beaver Brook now, or
yeah, it's the east ditch, the big ditch, we called it when we were kids. The Army Corps of Engineers dredged that out and cleaned it up to Sunset Road basically in 1949 because the whole farm area in the western town was basically drowned in water year-round. Remember the high water that we saw a year or two ago at Mountainside Park? Well, think of the whole area between Sunset Road North. That whole low area was basically flooded year-round.
Really?
And even though the legislature in 1811 passed an act that said that property owners could get together and assess each other to keep that ditch clean and whatever, that fell by the wayside. And the Army Corps did the work finally. It's an amazing, I have the file, it's about this thick of all the letters going back and forth, and it was an Army Corps project. So before that, definitely you could ice skate, you know, in that flooded area and through the ditches and everything.
So where did it flood? Like the area where the old Grace Church was, north of the area?
Yeah, north of that, you know, where the glens are, you know.
Oh.
You know, that whole area. And wherever, and you know, there were fields. There were farm fields, you know, both Sanders had farms from the corner of Sunset Road and West Parkway. Then you had the Infeld Nursery in the 50s, I forget whose farm it was before that. And all those farms went back into basically the woods and what we call the swamp, but, you know, that was high water. And there were no photographs in the file, so unfortunately.